Well, I'd like to call to order our Education Appropriations meeting, and I appreciate everyone being here. I appreciate Chairman Cantrell and Representative Glanton, Vice Chairman Glanton being here, both on our committee. I'm Chairman Robert Dickey, and we do have a sign-up sheet, I think, don't we? If anybody would like to address, we've got an agenda of several people, but certainly as time allows, we'd be happy to hear from anyone that would like to speak or comment on anything. So we'll open us up, and I'll ask Representative Glanton to open us up with a prayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you would pray with me, please. Thank you. Most loving and gracious God, we just come before you on this day and this hour only you could have granted us. Just thanking you for being the great I am. Father, thank you for this committee. Thank you for the leadership on this committee. And thank you for the like minds in this room, oh Father, as we move forward with education in the great state of Georgia. Father, we pray your special blessings over all within the sound of my voice. We pray these in all things. In the mighty and unmatched name of Jesus Christ, and those who believe said, amen.
Well, thank you very much. And we'll have some other committee members probably walk in. But first on our agenda is Professional Standards Commission, Christina Strode. Thank you for being here. And so we'll do that. And I appreciate very much what you do. And so share with our committee what you'd have us to hear.
Okay. As you know, perhaps know, our agency head, Kelly Henson, retired mid-January, and we don't have a new agency head yet. So it's my pleasure to stand in. And as you said, the chairman, my name is Christina Strode. I'm the Director of Management and Business Operations for the Georgia Professional Standards Commission. Since there is nothing in the governor's recommendations that's specific to us, it's just statewide changes, I was asked to just give an overview of what we do, since I know there are some new members, perhaps not here today, but maybe they will join us. But before I start, I do want to thank the governor and his team for including merit pay increases in the budget recommendations. It's much, much appreciated. We have a state budget of just under $7.3 million, plus additional funds through contracts with DECAL and DOE, and a Troops to Teacher grant that's funneled through DOE, and a Wallace Foundation grant through Albany State. And most of these fund sources are targeted for very, very specific purposes. When we fully staffed, there are 80 of us, 66 of whom are state funded. Our 18-member commission is appointed by the governor, and commission members include classroom teachers, administrators, higher ed faculty, school board members, and private sector members. So what do we do at PSC? We approve at a high level. We approve educator preparation or ed prep programs that prepare educators for Georgia certification. We certify educators, and we investigate and sanction those who misbehave. Our budget may be small, but our impact is large. Our work is inclusive and collaborative. We do much of it through task forces that include representatives from across the state, including teachers, faculty, administrators, and professional organizations, as well as our partner state agencies. Several House and Senate members have served on these task forces in the past and have been part of that work. We currently oversee 73 approved educator preparation providers and 872 approved programs. They include both the traditional four-year degree as well as alternative programs. You may have heard of Georgia TAP, all of which are held to the same standards and are reviewed on a regular basis. When you in the General Assembly, when you create new pathways in DOE or you add requirements for students, it often impacts teacher preparation as well, in which case we follow up with rule changes to both preparation and certification to make sure that we're in line. For example, this year you have several pieces of legislation in front of you regarding dyslexia. And in anticipation of such legislation, we've already started the work to create task forces to look at what we can do to strengthen preparation for both pre-service teachers and and training for current teachers. And we're looking forward to that work. As you know, every public school educator and certain other school personnel in the state must hold at least a clearance certificate, meaning they've passed a criminal history check and that they're now under the Georgia Code of Ethics for educators. Most also hold a 5-year professional certificate. In addition to supporting these certificated personnel, we also support prospective educators as well as staff in school systems and preparation providers who handle certification. As you can imagine, this keeps us very busy. Annually, our certification division fields over 60,000 phone calls and 70,000 to 90,000 emails. Even with this high volume, we have what we believe is the fastest processing time in the nation. You may, or at least I read recently an article about Florida where they were having studies, et cetera, because it's taking them over 6 months to issue certificates. And that's not an exception. Most states count this time in months. Our average processing time in FY18 was 6 days, something we're really proud of. And we attribute this to highly efficient staff as well as a high degree of automation. We're also charged with enforcing the Georgia Code of Ethics for educators, even though, or perhaps because, we start training on ethics as early as in preparation programs, and we continue that throughout everything we do, so we're very proactive. The number of cases opened increased by 65% in the past 5 years, and the number of investigations followed suit, resulting in backlogs both at PSC and the AG's office. As you can imagine, the longer a case lingers, the more difficult it is to investigate and to prosecute. But to end on a positive note, while 1,758 cases are a lot of cases, the percentage of educators who misbehave is minuscule. In FY18, the educators we sanctioned represented only 0.2% of the workforce. I want to thank you for your time and continued support, and we look forward to working with you this session. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to attempt to answer them.
Well, thank you very much. We do have a question, and I'd love some more if anybody's got any. Representative Glanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Actually, Kelly is a longtime friend of mine, and so I spoke with him last week, actually, and he's enjoying his retirement. But my question is that the Troops to Teachers program.
Yes, sir.
How well is that working? Are there obstacles that you see out there? I know you're not in the recruitment and retention business, but you're more in the certification. But do you see anything from your perspective? And then the second question is, with the prolonged investigations, even though the minimum number of educators are going through that process, is it because you don't have enough investigators, or what's causing the elongated investigation period?
Your first question regarding troops, I can't really answer yet because we've only had the program since June. So as you know, as far as I know, yes, it's going well. We're meeting the targets that we set in the grant application. And I do know that we have, as part of the grant, we have an advisory committee of people to look at the issues that you mentioned to see what's going on, what can we do differently, is there anything we need to do. So I can't answer that specifically. I think maybe after maybe a year or so, we will be in a better position to give you some answers to that. So I'd be happy to get back with you, and if I know anything, if I find out anything before then, I will certainly get back to you with that. But I do know that they feel like they were successful, they feel like it's going well, but I can't give you any specifics. In terms of the prolonged investigations, I think it's multiple factors. One, some of the investigations are more complex. Don't know exactly why, but they are. Part of it, like I said, could be the fact that we are training more, so people are reporting more. And we, you know, so obviously we hope that eventually the training that we start in the preparation programs, that will long-term lead to fewer cases and even fewer people sanctioned. We could use more investigators. There's only so much they can do, and that's something that's a high priority for us, because it's not obviously not good to have them linger as long as they are. But the complexity and just I think sometimes if they're criminal investigations, we hold off sometimes on our investigations. So that could play a factor as well. But we're looking at anything we can do on our end to, you know, we had a task force recently looking at abandonment of contract, which was one of the standards in the Code of Ethics, which we folded into another standard and became a little bit more lenient when it came to that, working with both school systems and educators, so that we would have fewer cases related to that. And we're looking at, is there any other area that we cover where we could potentially make sure that we don't send as many cases to the AG's office. But our commission, they're individuals. They, you know, and they take their work very, very seriously. And so we certainly want them to use their best judgment in what needs to go forward. So I don't think I really answered your question, but we feel like there's only so much the current staff can do, and the investigations just keep coming in, or the cases keep coming in, and we're still looking at the why and what we can do. We are working with the AG's office right now to see if we can get a SAG, a Special Attorney General, to help with some of the backlog on their end, with some funds, so that we can at least start reducing what's over there.
Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So, based on your current load and your backload, then you said that you could use more investigators, and I'm assuming that that's based on your current workload as well as your backload. How many investigators are we talking, and is that something you've gotten to a point yet, or you're still kind of trying to assess where we are? I'm trying to look at the numbers, if you will, to help to expedite the process, so that it's not taking so long, and to ensure that we, as a General Assembly, are doing everything we need to do to make sure that we're supporting the process as needed.
Right. We've looked at it, and it depends on how you run the numbers. I think last year I looked at it, and we have 7 investigators. I think I looked at it, and it looked like if we had 12, it would go better. But that's an enormous number, and you know that number keeps changing. I think if you add a new investigator, they can handle about 90 cases a year typically. So we would obviously reduce each investigator we added would be a few cases fewer, but you know we understand the needs of the state budget, and certainly support the governor's recommendations in all areas, and it's something we'll keep coming back to and keep looking at, and doing everything we can internally in terms of training for investigators, et cetera.
One final?
Yeah.
Okay. If I understood you correctly, you say you have 7 current.
Correct.
And you could use about 12.
That was
just a raw number.
Right.
You could use about 12. So we're talking about being able to handle annually another 400 cases.
probably.
If each one's handling
Yeah, probably.
90 cases per.
Right.
Okay.
Except we're probably mixing ways of looking at it, because I looked at it one way when I did the 12, and then I had different new information when we talked about 90. So I can't really commit to a number today.
Right.
It's just something I remember from a couple of years ago.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chairman Cantrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your work. If my math's right, and that's in some question, it looks like there's about 161,000 certified teachers currently. Does that sound about right?
Probably about right.
It
yeah.
doesn't have to be exactly right, but I just
Yeah.
divided 3,000 into the budgeted amount that in the governor's recommendation. Do you know what percentage of those certified teachers would be in administration and not be in the classroom?
No, I don't. That might be a better question for DOE.
DOE would know
Yeah,
that.
maybe.
Is there anybody from DOE here today that could answer that? Maybe later offline? Could you answer that?
We'll get to it.
We'll get to it, but you don't have to do it right now, but okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? If not, thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank
you
you.
being here. Next on our agenda, Employee Retirement System, ERS, Jim Ponovan. There you are. And thank you for being here. The mic's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jim Potvin. I'm the Executive Director of the Employees Retirement System. And I, too, have been asked to give a brief overview of kind of who we are for the benefit of the new members to the committee. So the Employees Retirement System is responsible, of course, for administering the flagship pension program for state employees, which is also known as the Employees Retirement System. There are currently about 60,000 or so active members and about 51,000 retirees in that system. We also have a number of other programs that we're responsible for as well. 4 other defined benefit plans, including the Public School Employees Retirement System, which is for non-teacher public school employees such as bus drivers and cafeteria workers, custodians. The Legislative Retirement System, which is the one that many or most of you are a part of, the Judicial Retirement System, and the Georgia Military Pension Fund, which is a small supplemental benefit for members of the National Guard. We're also responsible for the Peach State Reserves, 401k and 457 plans, as well as a defined contribution plan for part-time and seasonal employees known as the Georgia Defined Contribution Plan, and 2 life insurance plans which closed in 2009 to new members but still have about 70,000 members combined in the 2 programs. The most important reporting that we do each year is the actuarial valuation, which is done on an annual basis by the actuaries. They calculate the liabilities of the system, determine kind of a snapshot of where the system stands financially, and determines contribution rates that the employers, i.e. the state, will have to put into the plans in a future year. The most recent actuarial valuation was done as of June 30, 2017. In that, it was reported that the funding ratio for the ERS plan is about 75%. This represents an improvement from the low of about 71% that occurred around 2013-2014 timeframe. So we have been slowly improving the overall funded position of the plan, while at the same time making necessary adjustments to some of the actuarial assumptions to comply with, improving mortality and other actuarial standards that have changed over the past several years. The actuarially determined contribution rates, while high for ERS on a historical basis, have been stable for the past several years. We've been in this current the current level of contributions since 2016 and will remain there until at least 2021. I do not know beyond that. The ERS itself has 3 benefit tiers. The first tier was what we called the old plan and closed in 1982. There are only a few dozen active state employees left who are members of that tier. The new plan started in 1982 and went through the end of 2008, and the current tier, what we call GSEPs, is a combination pension and 401k plan that started in 2009, and all new ERS members are automatically put into those plans going forward. The combined asset value of the defined benefit systems is about $16 billion. $13 billion of that is the ERS plan. So as you can see, most of our asset base and benefit payments come out of the ERS plan. We pay about $1.4 billion per year to our ERS beneficiaries for an average annual benefit of just under $27,000 per year and a median annual benefit of less than $22,000 per year. In the actuarial valuation, probably the most significant assumption that we make is the investment return and discount rate assumption. For many years, we were using a 7.5% assumed rate of return. Last year, the board took an action which will reduce that assumption over a period of several years. We are currently at 7.3% with a long-term target of 7.0% in the future. Over the past 25 years, we've returned an average of about 8%, so we are meeting our actuarial assumptions from that standpoint, but we did feel it was wise on our part to get a little bit more conservative, give ourselves a little bit more room in the event of the inevitable market correction that we face at some point in the future, although we don't know exactly when. FY19 fiscal year to date, so that's since July, we're at a little less than 1% year to date. So after 2 years in a row where we met our actuarial, our investment return assumption, this year we're slightly behind the pace that we would need to be at and may not make it this year. Our asset allocation for our investments, we're primarily a stocks and bonds portfolio. We're in the upper 60s, around 67 or so percent. Public and private equity. The private equity portion of that portfolio is only about 1.5% of the entire portfolio, however, so it's a very small portion. Mostly it's public equities, and excuse me, and about 30% fixed income. As I mentioned, we have about 60,000 active ERS members. That is significantly less than we were about 10 years ago. In 2008, we had 75,000 active members, and there are two basic impacts to that decline. Number one, of course, is that we don't have 15,000 people that we are eventually going to have to pay, so it is a way to control liabilities in the plan. But in the short term, it also has impacted the contributions that we have received into the plan. When we set our contribution rates, we set them for 2 or 3 years out, assuming at least a level, if not a slightly increasing payroll. And when payroll decreases, we're essentially getting lower contributions than what we would have anticipated when we set it, when we set the rates. So that is why it's one of the primary reasons that our percentage for our contribution rate is high. The dollars that we needed to go into the plan are actually less because the liabilities are a little bit lower than they would have been. About 120,000 total active members in all the plans that we administer, and about 72,000 folks who are receiving benefits on a monthly basis from us. Finally, the Peach State Reserves Program, we have about 35,000 members in the current GSEPS tier, so about 56% of our active membership is now in this newest tier that began 10 years ago. In total, we have about 80,000 401k and 457 accounts with a total of about $1.6 billion combined in the two systems. And I'll stop there and be happy to answer any questions.
Good afternoon. As it pertains to retirees of ERS and TRS, the issue with COLA, can you give us an overview of what that issue is or how that works?
Right. So the statutory authority for the two boards is quite similar for the two systems. Basically, at least I'll speak for ERS, the statute reads that the board is authorized to provide for a method of providing a way for the retirees to maintain their purchasing power over time, provided that it is actuarially feasible for the system to do that. So in the late 1960s, both boards set their long-term policies for how they were going to go about doing that. In the case of the ERS, the board chose to treat those COLAs as ad hoc decisions that would have to be made on an annual basis, and we're not going to pre-fund them. So what happens is whenever we grant a COLA, we actually add liabilities to the system that have not otherwise previously been accounted for. From a practical standpoint, until the late 2000s, the impact was basically the same. Both systems paid COLAs on a regular basis, and approximately the same level, about 3%, with some increases in prior years. In the late 2000s, however, when we had the 2008-2009 market crash, the ERS plan was impacted to the point where the board felt that it was no longer prudent to simply rubber stamp a 3% COLA for everybody every year. And in fact, they stopped paying. They've not made the decision to pay a COLA, a true COLA, since that time. In recent years, they have been trying to get back to a point where we can at least do some kind of post-retirement benefit adjustment. So for the past 3 years, we've done one-time checks,
Right.
but that is not the same as doing a COLA. So the truth is that we have not paid a COLA out of the ERS fund in just about 10 years.
But you have out of the TRS. So what is the difference between how those two are structured?
So I'm going to let Dr. Evans answer the TRS questions directly in a little bit. As I understand it, however, the difference is in the pre-funding that TRS has done. In other words, their actuarial assumptions have always assumed that there would be COLAs paid. That is not true for ERS. So we're always paying on the back end. And again, it would require us to assume additional liabilities beyond what we've already paid for in order to pay a COLA. I'll give you an example. To pay a 3% COLA, a true COLA that is an actual add-on to an employee's benefit in the ERS plan, would cost the system about $375 million in long-term liabilities, which would instantly add about $33 million a year to the contributions that we would require from the state over a 25-year period to pay that off. If you did that multiple years in a row, you can see how that would add up very quickly, and so that's where the board has been cautious about taking on that liability.
Right. Very good. Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Very informative. You sort of set up this next gentleman pretty well. TRS, Buster Evans. Buster, you've got a great career in education and service to our state. How about telling our my committee a little bit your background? It's great. You ought to brag on yourself.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It is a privilege to be with you. I feel like I have been blessed and very fortunate. I'm especially thankful now to be able to serve as your Executive Director of Teachers Retirement System. I was, most of my career, I'm not even sure that Chairman Dickey knows this, I was actually in the agribusiness field back in the late 1970s and early 80s. Really wanted to be involved in education. I was encouraged to be in education, part of the reason because of the outstanding retirement system that I knew was there. And I had a spouse that was an educator, and she was looking forward to being able to retire at some point in time in the future. And I thought I was going to have to work till I was 75 years of age. So anyway, we both ended up in the education career. I was very fortunate in the mid-1990s to be the first appointed school superintendent in Bleckley County. Served there for 11 years, and then I looked at the way of life, how outstanding it was up in Chairman Tanner's section of the country, and moved to Forsyth County, Cumming, and he was actually had served as a part of our district there, as state representative, served there 7 years as superintendent of schools. And then one day, as a part of criminal justice reform, was encouraged to join that effort as Assistant Commissioner for the Georgia Department of Corrections, and we began to build and put in place the education and career and technical components of the now criminal justice reform efforts as they relate. And that was an outstanding success, and regardless of what you do in other things and you look at what you've done and supported over the past, I think that's one of the things that changed a lot of lives and made a lot of difference, because education, whether it's behind the walls of prison, whether it's in pre-K programs, or whether it's in K-12, changes people's lives. And so I'm still very fortunate to be able to be a part of education, being now at Teachers Retirement System, where I've been for about 2.5 years. To tell you a little bit, of course, the Section 45, you have our tracking sheet. There are no really major changes. You see a remaining number of $240,000. $220,000, a declining number each year, which is a COLA that is paid to 6 systems that were absorbed into Teachers Retirement System back in the 1970s. Everything else is not direct state funded, but funding that is generated from within the system, whether they be employer contributions to pay for the $41 million of our operation. You know, oftentimes we're asked about expenses of our fund as it relates to investment expenses. And one of the things that I do like to point out is, because we do have all of our trading that is done, or 80% of our trading is done in-house, we generate, or our investment services division generates over $44 million a year in fees from securities lending. So in essence, from an operations standpoint, it really doesn't cost the state anything. Where oftentimes you see, and I'll point out in the information that our CFO handed out to you just a few minutes ago, what you hear cost most directly associated with teachers' retirement system are those employer contributions that are paid on behalf of our by our employers for each of our employees. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. But we are administered by a 10-member board of trustees. We're a defined benefit plan where the state's ERS plan has 3 different tiers. We only have 1 tier. That tier's basically been in place since the fund was created in 1943 and became active in 1945. We currently have about $74 billion in assets. We're ranked the 24th largest pension fund in the nation. We have roughly 236,000 active contributing members, and 128,000, roughly 500 retired members. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner of the first sheet there, you see how our membership has changed over the years, and you saw we actually see where we declined nearly 16,000 members as a part of the recovery from the recession. That was one of perhaps 3 factors that led to our higher contribution rates. The other, certainly we lost assets when our fund dropped in terms of the stocks that we lost values in. The other thing was clearly the loss in membership, fewer members paying in less dollars. And the third thing that doesn't show up in here is we closed our amortization scale just as ERS did, which drove up our contribution rates to some. That's a good thing in the long term, because if you look 25 years down the road from now, you will see our UAL, or our unfunded accrued liability, drop significantly, which will add to the long-term sustainability of the fund. Our largest employers as a group are, first of all, the University System of Georgia, very, very large. Our largest as a group is K-12 education, where most of our members come from. Interestingly enough, we also have Technical College System of Georgia, our county extension agents. But one group that has now emerged as actually our 3rd largest group of active contributing members are charter school teachers. And with nearly 5,000 of our active members now being charter school members. And you have that information there. I do want to get to some numbers that I think are going to be important to you as we talk about long-term sustainability. A couple of things have happened that we do feel real good about. First of all, people being hired back by our employers. We see those numbers increasing, more people putting money into the fund. Second thing that we've seen, salary increases that build in actuarially, which again adds to more money by which investments can be made in returns. Approximately 65% of all of our benefits that are paid out come from our investment returns. You'll see that roughly the last 24 months have actually been pretty good for us. As Mr. Potvin pointed out, we've had 2 consecutive years of better than expected returns, and we're still crossing our fingers for a good ending by the end of June. We are currently at about 75% funded, just as ERS system is. If you look to see how that sits, we took a little chart that we stole from someone else to show how we actually were a couple of years ago in comparison to everybody else in the country. And you'll find us, generally speaking, ranking very well against the better funds throughout the nation. I did talk about fund sustainability and a few things that we have done over the years, of perhaps the most positive thing being closing that amortization schedule to pay off that unfunded liability. And there have been another couple of actions that were taken by the board as well. Annually, we pay out $4.7 billion in benefits to our beneficiaries. Just a couple of numbers that I think you may find interesting. While our average monthly benefit is about $3,300 a month, our average new beneficiary benefit is about $2,300 a month. And the difference, obviously, gets to the gentleman's question as it relates to the cost of living adjustment that teachers has continued to pay out due to a couple of factors. One, that actuarial assumption that it is pre-funded, number one. 2, that our employee contribution rate is significant. We feel like it's significantly higher at 6%, which factors into the consideration that that cost of living adjustment will be paid. Looking down the road, I know everybody's been really uneasy the last couple of years. We've been uneasy about those increases that you've been making. We're thankful for them because that has ensured our continued sustainability of those employer contributions. But to give you a little bit of good news, this year that number has only gone up just ever so slightly. Next year, maybe this is not the best term, but you're going to get a little money back. We see that roughly about $150 million reduction in those employer contributions rate. And we don't like to get too far out making actuarial projections about where this is going, but if you can look and see, we are not projecting the type of increases that you funded for us over the last couple of years in employee contributions. We believe that's going to be good for you. We know that it's going to be good for us, and hopefully be able to maintain and protect the defined benefit plan as our teachers in the state of Georgia. And Mr. Chairman, I'll be delighted to answer any questions if there are any from the group, and at this time, thank you.
Thank you very much, very thorough. You do have one question.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a question in reference to the governor's proposed raises for the teachers, and how would that affect the state retirement and as well as the local school system? I know we've been hearing it from Clayton County about it, and so I just want to know from your perspective, how does all that factor into what you all are having to do?
Certainly a very perceptive question. First and foremost, we like it just like the teachers do, because that'll be increased contributions coming into the system that hopefully we can return revenues on. Now, we do know, though, that's going to increase roughly 54% of our contributions come from state dollars. That means the remaining 46% are going to come from places like local as well as federal. So you're going to have some districts that are going to have a larger percentage of what they pick up as a part of that. Some will be able to use federal dollars for those federally funded positions, but some for those locally funded positions will be picking up 100% of the TRS contribution for those employer contribution rates. So I hope that gets to your question, but on our side and the teacher side, we certainly think it's a good thing. It may require a little bit of budget tightening as systems try to figure out how they pick up those costs specifically for those teachers that they pay at the local level that they don't earn state funds for.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Evans. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good. Thanks for coming. Next on our agenda is Joy Hawkins with the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. Joy, welcome back to our committee. Thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to talk, Mr. Chairman and members, about our budget for FY20. So, along with the administrative increases due to cyber security and other things, we have two requests, and one is to transfer to DOE.
Excuse me, for the committee, it's 27.7, Governor's Office of Student Achievement.
I'm sorry, should have said that. So our first request is we have $3.4 million for AP STEM and STEAM and low income that we would like to transfer to DOE to administer. And we've been in conversation with Matt Jones and Ted Beck. They're fine with that. That was in the governor's recommended budget. And the only other new item that we have is, as you all know, GOSA houses the Governor's School Leadership Academy. And this past year, we had two cohorts of aspiring and principals in that Leadership Academy. So we had 26 principals from the lowest performing schools and 19 aspiring. We want to increase that number to 50 for another cohort this year. And the amount of money that we've requested and the governor recommended is $250,000. And this will not continue, but in these first couple of years, we've offered a stipend of $4,000 per participant, and then $1,000 for travel. And so that's what accounts for that number. Other than that, you asked about the governor's honors program last time, and we do have a brochure now. Applications are due. Were due in January, and semifinalists were selected at the end of January, and the finalists will be selected March 29th. And so if you want information about that, I'm happy to share.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Joel, we do have one question from Representative Stovall.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
What was the reasoning behind the transfer of the funds from advanced placement to the testing program with DOE?
To be honest, I'm really not sure if it was a policy reason. DOE administers the AP exam, as you know. And so on transition, the question came up, do we want to keep it in GOSO or do we want to follow? And this was actually Governor Deal's recommendation that Governor Kemp kept. In conversations with the DOE, it makes more sense. They negotiate those contracts anyway, and they execute on them. Ted's here if there are any questions for DOE. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Ted Beck, you want to cover that? It's a good question. You want to answer this one?
No, sir. I don't have a whole lot to add other than we'd be glad to take the program back into our confines. We've administered it historically. It's been over at GOSA for the last 2 years, I think. So it wouldn't be much of a change for it to come back inside our walls. I think the delivery of the program would be identical on the ground level for students.
You got another question? Go ahead.
On the administration of the grants that's up on the GOSA, did you all see any increase in the number of schools that were applying to organizations? Because I didn't see any requests in here for any additional funds for those innovation grants.
Okay, good question. My understanding is we were in FY15, there was an appropriation that carries forward. And so we have sufficient funds to administer those grants. And what I can do is we have a map showing the districts who have participated. That might be useful for you to see. You know, what we want to do is get to those systems that really need it the most. And as any grant process goes, I think there's a tendency to look at the best application and to choose those applications over time. And so we're really stepping back and looking at that process to see, you know, what areas need the grant funds to do what they need to do the most, and looking at how we can help them with the process that gets them to the end game. I'm happy to share that.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Hawkins. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so
Good.
much.
Next on our agenda, DeKalb, Department of Early Care Learning. Amy Jacobs, thank you for being here, and a lot of good things going on with our young people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. So we are page 1 of your tracking sheet, section 22. And our first changes are in child care services, which is 22.1, and those are both statewide changes. So unless you'd like more information, I will skip to the next set of changes, which you'll find at 22.3, which is the pre-kindergarten program. So 22.3.1 through 22.3.6 are all the statewide adjustments that you're familiar with. So I will start and talk about 22.3.7, okay, which is a reduction of $5.3 million. And this is a reduction just based on estimated actual expenditures for the supplement we pay for teachers based on experience and education. So you'll remember back in 17, through the Governor's Education Reform Commission, Governor Deal, and then the legislature supported an increase for a supplement for pre-K teachers to mirror pay parity for K-12 teachers. And at that point, it was just an estimate of what we thought we needed. So this is truly just what I like to call a true-up of budget to actual expenditure. So there will be no impact to teacher salary, classrooms, or students. This is just giving us more in line with what we actually need to pay out that supplement every year. And the next one is 22.3.8, which is an increase of $15 million for a $3,000 pay increase for pre-K teachers. And so this is in line with the pay increase that Governor Kemp has recommended for all teachers, and we were ecstatic to see that pre-K was included in that. And 22.3.9 is a 2% salary increase for assistant teachers of $1.5 million. And as you'll know, assistant teachers are a critical piece of a pre-K program, especially with 22 4- and 5-year-olds in a classroom. Those are all the changes that we have, but I'm absolutely happy to answer any questions.
All right, Commissioner, I have a question that kind of goes back to the retirement question. So do the pre-K teachers, are they eligible for participating in the retirement?
So it just depends. So as you know, half of our classrooms are in private childcare, so they would not be eligible since they're paid by private small businesses. But the ones that are in the public schools would be eligible and are under TRS.
Okay, so that goes back to the other earlier question as far as that means that the local school districts will now try to figure out, I guess, that 46% on how to cover the, I guess, the retirement for them with the increase in the pay raise.
Well, in our pre-K formula, it does include any increases in any type of fringe benefit like a TRS. So that $15 million should include that, unless, of course, they pay more than we pay them through our formula. Then they would be responsible for the rest. But this should cover what we pay through our formula.
Okay, so the local school districts that have the pre-K programs in it would not be, they won't have to worry about trying to budget for that
They
for the
should
pre-K.
not, unless they pay more than we give them for those teachers.
Okay,
right.
thank you.
Right.
Good. Very straightforward. Thank you for what you do. Very important program.
Thank you for your support. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Moving right along. Next is Department of Ed. Ted Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I can make mine as short as hers, but we probably have to omit some stuff. So I'm not going to discuss the statewide changes unless there's any specific questions about those. That's largely the verbiage that you'll see as an example in section 24.1 for agriculture education. All 5 of those change items are what we call the statewide. The only one with any real significant impact to the department is obviously the merit increase, so the total amount for that across the department is about $1.2 million, and we're certainly appreciative of the governor's consideration and are hopeful that that's something that manifests in the actual Appropriations Act. The first actual change item, other than the statewide changes, is on section 24.5. And so this is obviously the big news of the day. This is the teacher salary increase. This is a total amount of $483 million. The way that this would be implemented, our understanding is that we would be adjusting the state salary schedule, so taking every box in that matrix, as it were, and increasing that amount by $3,000. The way that that is drawn down by districts is that there's a number inside the formula that refers to what we call a base teacher. And that is a assumed teacher with a 4-year degree and no years of experience. Right now, the salary amount for that is $34,000 and I think $92,000. So this would be increasing that from $34,000 to $37,000. So every time a district is earning that base teacher because of their FTE count, they're drawing down some portion of this $483 million. And that's just kind of rough math, but that is the way that we understand that that's been designed. The next section with change items is in the GNETS program, and this is in section 24.11. And items 4 and 5 are the actual changes there. Item 4
This is a change due just to enrollment. As you know, the department has been working for several years now to ensure that the students that are in a GNETS facility are there for a reason. And so we've done a lot of assessment and continual reassessment of those students to make sure that when the student is ready to return to a traditional classroom environment, that's where they go. So the enrollment for that program continues to decline, and as a result, the funding needed for it continues to decline in tandem. That said, the corresponding offset is that item 5 in that same program, the same salary increase that's been recommended for our teachers in our traditional K-12 settings has been recommended as well for the teachers inside of the GNETS facilities. And so that would be an increase of about $3 million. So the total net change to that program as it stands would be a decrease of around $430,000. And if you have any questions at any point, please just stop and I'll be glad to answer those. Section 24.14, this is the non-quality basic education formula grants program. So these are some of these ancillary grant programs that are included in what we call the formula that aren't QBE specifically. One of those is the residential treatment facilities program. These are places where we have students with some sort of an emotional issue or other issue that requires some in-house and residential ways of addressing that. And so there's an education component to that as well. And so we do fund for that. Enrollment in those programs and the number of beds available for those students has increased across the state. And so this is a small increase of reflecting that. The Sparsity program, you'll see in line 5. This is a program that historically has been kind of on the wane. These are very small schools, usually in rural settings. If that school doesn't hit a certain enrollment number, an example is if it doesn't have at least 450 students in an elementary school, the state will pretend like it does and fund the difference. The number of schools which qualify for this program has been declining over the years as the state's K-12 system has grown. We have seen a small uptick in the program in districts that are losing students. So some of these schools that are small schools to begin with have gotten smaller, and so this year you'll see that reflected with an almost $1 million enhancement. Item 6 is also related to the Sparsity program. This would increase the salary related to the instructional positions in that particular grant formula by 2%. And item 7 changes the salaries for all of your certified staff and employees inside of the RTF program, the residential treatment program, by that $3,000 increase that we referred to earlier. Section 24.15, that's nutrition. You'll see in line 6 a recommendation for a 2% salary increase for nutrition staff. The department funds these positions, at least in part, at the district level, and so the salary dollars that are being allotted by the state down to the district would increase by 2%. Section 24.16, preschool disability services. These are a small group of 3- and 4-year-olds that you'll see inside of a K-12 setting for certain districts, but we do have instructional staff assigned to those. So again, the two components that you would expect to see along with any other traditional teacher is the training and experience piece and any change to the salary schedule. So those are reflected on lines 2 and 3. Line 2 is the training and experience piece specifically, and then line 3 is what the $3,000 increase would amount to for those instructors. On page 5, we have, I lost my program. This is pupil transportation. This program was carved out from what was the QBE program in years past, and so it's been a part and part of QBE on and off over the years, but at this point it's separate, and so you'll see a separate calculation done to reflect enrollment growth for transportation. That's an increase of about $820,000. And much like we do with nutrition, there are salary supplements that go out specifically for transportation staff, and so they're being recommended for a 2% increase, and that amounts to about $1.7 million on the state side. We've got one of our bigger ticket items in section 24.18, so this is the equalization program. This is the grant program that looks at each district's tax digest and the number of students that they have, and if that ratio for a specific district is below what the state average looks like, we equalize them. And so the net result of that, the takeaway in terms of the appropriation is any time the tax digest increases for the state, the amount it costs to equalize a district that's below that average is going to increase. And so for the last 3 years now, we've seen an increase in the total tax digest for the state. Usually it's been a $40 billion jump, an $80 billion jump, and I think another $80 billion jump again this year. That usually manifests with an increase in this particular program. Similar to that is 24.19, similar but it's opposite. The local 5 mil share program is the reflection of what 5 mils of every district in the state's tax digest looks like. So again, as their tax digests go up, the amount that the state defrays the total QBE payments by also increases, so that negative number gets larger. So normally, again, when you see the tax digest increases, you'll see a appropriation increase in the equalization program, and then you'll see the amount that the state pays for QBE go down a little bit by a corresponding increase in the negative number for 5 mil share, which I know is kind of fun to say. Section 24.20 is the QBE program itself, and so lines 3, 4, 5, and 6 are the adjustments for this year. I'm sorry, line 2 as well. So line 2 is training and experience. Make sure I'm saying that right. Yeah. And enrollment growth. So that's the big change for the year. So this reflects what is actually a fairly static year in terms of the number of students inside of K-12. But as we discussed in the amended budget, the QBE categories into which our K-12 students are being placed has been shifting into more and more expensive categories as a result of the additional services being provided to those students. So even though we didn't see a lot of growth specifically, we did see a continued push into some of those higher cost categories. And the other part of that is the training and experience piece. And this is, I think, a good news story. If you look at the average tenure of teachers in the teaching corps, that has increased fractionally, but it has been increasing for the last several years. So as teachers stay on the salary schedule for longer, the supplement that the state pays out increases. So we're seeing a slight and continued increase in the average tenure of teachers in the state, and the number of teachers specifically in the state in the instructional corps has been increasing, which is something that Dr. Evans referred to. Districts are hiring again, and so we've seen a jump anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 a year for the past several years. That's not a universal condition. There are districts that are able to hire, and there's districts that aren't hiring, but as the state as a whole, we're seeing more teachers in that program, and so training and experience costs continue to grow as well. Question earlier about what the instructional corps looks like. Our last count, we do our teacher census in October of every year. We had 140,000 or so positions showing up on that report, so that's folks that are in the classroom or in administration. I was just going to make a wild guess, and I was going to be pretty close. I thought it would be 15% in administration. It's about 13. And then we've got 3 or 4% that are in what we call support staff roles that aren't specifically administration. They're not specifically instructional. There's some sort of a hybrid there. Item 3, this is a reduction in the math and science teacher pay supplement. And the short story there is that the number of instructors that qualify for that program has continued to decrease for several years, and so this just mirrors that trend, and it's a reduction of about $1.5 million. School nursing had a small decrease, and this again is just reflecting the fact that we didn't see a lot of FTE growth, and we actually saw FTE declines in more districts than we saw increases, and so the way that meets out is just a small decrease to the nursing program. Line 5, these are grants paid to systems that are registered as charter systems. This cost a lot more money in the past when these systems were first just being certified as charter systems. Now that everybody has declared one way or the other, all we're really funding on an ongoing basis is the enrollment change in those districts. And so that's an increase of about $1 million. And finally, line 6, this is an increase to the state commission charter school program. This is a bigger number than usual, and it's big for 2 reasons. One is just growth. We do continue to see some pretty substantive enrollment growth and just the number of state-authorized charter schools. But the bigger piece this year is the impact of House Bill 787. This was a piece of legislation that was passed last year that revised, put simply, a lot of the ways that these organizations are compensated. So it increased the amount that they were going to receive from the state. And so this is a big push to match what that's going to cost, and I don't think it'll cost this much in the future since it'll be implemented largely this year, but it does increase the amount going out the door to the state authorized charter schools. Section 24.21 is the RESA program, that same 2% increase that you've seen for some of our ancillary programs like nutrition and the transportation program is reflected there for those instructional staff and other staff that are placed inside the RESAs that are doing work with our school systems. And page 6 is our last page, section 24.24. This is the state schools program. We do run 3 schools, the Georgia School for the Deaf in Cave Spring, the Georgia Academy for the Blind in Macon, and the Atlanta Area School for the Deaf in Clarkston. So those obviously have very specialized populations. They're smaller schools, but we certainly have a wide array of instructors with a lot of different skill sets there, and so they continue to increase, not necessarily in number, but in their time with the state, and so our training and experience number did increase for them a fair amount, considering the size of the schools, by about $250,000, and the same consideration was given to them as in terms of being instructors in the state for that $3,000 increase. There's a small decrease in section 24.25 in tech and career ed. This is line 6. We had received some one-time funds for a study that we conducted last year, and so this is just eliminating the funds that were associated with that study now that it's complete. And finally, in section 24.26, this is the testing program. Director Hawkins covered most of this, but line 6 reflects the transfer of the AP funding for those tests back from GOSA back into the department. As I said earlier, we would be more than happy to take that back over. We have the same staff, remarkably, that were working on that when it left, and so we've got some familiarity there and obviously some relationships with the vendors for those products. So we believe we'd be able to, again, take that back over without there being any change in the experience of students. And line 7 is the last item you see there. This is a recommendation that essentially parrots what happened in the amended bill, instructing us to recognize $175,000 of existing funds in order to fund the alternative assessment waiver program. And this is largely the result of some of the requirements listed in Senate Bill 362. So those are our budget changes as recommended by the governor for FY 2020, and I'll certainly be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ted. Very thorough as always. I've got a question. We got a couple other people, members here that got some questions to go back, so I kind of held them till the end. But one that's really on my mind is throughout this tracking sheet, provide funds to adjust the state base salary for increases, salary increases for certified teachers and certified employees. So my question is, does the governor's QBE calculation for the pay raise for $3,000 include counselors, social workers, psychologists, and special education specialists like media specialists and technology specialists who are certified? Are they calculated into the governor's QBE calculation for that $3,000 raise?
The short answer is no. When we talk about earning a teacher inside the formula, the big chunk of funding that goes out the door is that base teacher, that instructor. And so that position is reflected in the $3,000 raise. So it's changing that base number from $34,000 to $37,000. There are components of that same block of funding that go out on a per FTE basis, and there's slices of, let's say, a counselor, the funding for a counselor, or a psychologist. And I don't have the exact list, but you earn a little bit of one of those positions each time. And most of those are also certified positions. In tying back to the number that was produced in the governor's recommendation, it appears that, again, that base number has changed. Some of the certified ancillary positions are included in that. Some are not. They're being included in that 2% increase. So there is a separation there. And again, not having the exact list on hand, I couldn't tell you which ones are in the $3,000 category and which ones are in the 2%. But there is a differentiation there on that block of funding that's going out on that per FTE basis.
Well, will that create 2 salary schedules? going forward? I mean, does that give you worry? What kind of problem will that be?
I don't know that it
I
would
mean,
create-
we've never had two salary schedules.
That's
Is that correct?
That is correct.
So now this would be two salary schedules. And how will that be handled?
I honestly don't know if we would have two. One of the things that we talk about is that what you earn from the state is different than what you spend it on. We don't have the same controls over expenditures that we used to under the previous incarnation of QBE when we had expenditure controls. So with the advent of the strategic waiver systems and the charter systems, all but 2 of our districts have waived the salary schedule. So they don't have to pay on a salary schedule anymore. So we still produce a salary schedule for the purposes of having numbers to put into the formula and that people can still reference. The reality is that a majority of our districts still do pay on the state salary schedule even though they don't have to. They use it as a reference, and that is what their instructional core compensation is based on.
So governor's
I guess what I would-
expecting the school systems to pay for that increase, for those raises, for those positions?
Each district has the ability to earn those funds and expend them in the way that that local board and that superintendent think is best for that district.
All right, let me ask another one. Does the governor's QBA calculation with the 3,000 pay raise include school administrators, central office staff, and those type people who are certified?
I can't remember offhand. I'm going to use one of my lifelines and try to peek around the corner. Does it include the administrative staff? Do you guys remember? We're going to have to check back and look.
Well, I think
offhand.
that's a good question.
Yes,
That
sir.
certainly occurs to me. Those people don't have interaction with children. The counselors, the psychologists, media specialists certainly do day in, day out.
Yes, sir.
So just something that we're trying to figure out.
I understand.
Got a couple other questions. Representative Stovall,
Okay, I do have a couple.
your floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. At 24.11, the one with the Georgia network with the GNETs.
Yes, ma'am.
So with the decrease in that amount, what about the services that were being provided for the students? Did that result in a decrease in, I mean, I know you're not gonna have as many kids, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those services, the cost of the services will go down because you might have certain kids that need, particular type of services. So was that reflected in that decrease as well? I guess an estimate.
The decrease is the result of a formula, so it's based largely on enrollment counts. I don't believe there's anything in there specifically that says this service or that service is funded at this amount. Our expectation is certainly that each of these facilities continues to serve their students with an appropriate level of quality. So even if the funding changes, it would be incumbent upon that facility and that district, if they're housed within a district, to make sure that the students are getting what it is they're supposed to get. So this doesn't, again, reflect anything specific to services. It really just reflects the fact that there are fewer students in GNET's programs at this point.
Okay. And my next question is 24.14 for the non-quality education formula grant. So did the increase in the school, could it have been with the increase in the school options for, I guess, the sparsity grants? When you said about the small schools that were in the rural areas, a lot of times might not have that certain amount of students, and then the state said, well, okay, you actually do have the students, even though physically they might not have.
Correct.
That's what is that correct about the sparsity?
It is, yeah. So
okay.
We update that list of qualifying schools, I think, every 5 years, and so I think we're coming up on the next renewal, as it were. So we've had this same pocket of schools kind of scattered across the state that are considered sparse. And so each time they lose students, the amount that the state's going to pay out in sparsity increases a little bit. So it's not a huge change in that amount or those enrollments, but as we've seen in most of our rural districts, they have fewer students than they had 4 years ago. And so every year we've seen some sort of an uptick in this particular program as a result, so that gap between what the state's going to assume are inside the school walls and what's actually there continues to grow.
Have you all, do you all know what was the cause of the decrease in the student enrollment from those schools that are sparsity, that were receiving the sparsity grants?
The specific reason for the decline, no, ma'am.
Okay.
I think it's indicative of a larger trend that we've seen. We showed a chart at the joint committee hearings earlier in the year that looked at enrollment change over the last 5 years, and I believe it was 2/3 of our districts across the state, so 120 or so of our 180 have fewer students in them than they did in 2013. And most of those are, again, in areas of the state that you would consider outside metropolitan regions, so they're either rural or they're exurban, however you want to look at it. So it's that band kind of across southwest Georgia up into the Augusta area, some towards kind of the northwestern corner of the state, and then a handful kind of in middle Georgia. But most districts have fewer students in them, and I think that's just the experience that we've seen statewide for what you consider some of the more rural areas of the state.
And I was just wondering, did it have to do with any of the increase in some of the school options that are going on across the state? So that's why I was asking about that with down in those areas. Well, the next question I have is on 2420, I guess it's the one where you reduced the funds for the newly certified math and science teachers.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I wanted to know what is the projection of how that will affect the need that we have now in the state for more STEAM workforce, and being that you don't have enough, teachers that are qualified in that area, that means it's going to affect our future workforce. And does the state or does DOE have any programs that you are might have in effect or projecting to do that may be able to help, I guess what the original bill was set up for, to kind of be able to go back and be able to increase that number of those science and math teachers?
The trick here is that I don't know that this necessarily reflects that we have fewer of those teachers. We have fewer teachers that are electing to participate. It requires some action on the instructor to kind of initiate the process. In most cases, they have to advocate for themselves. So it may be the result of two things, and there was a group of teachers that were included when the program started that have kind of aged out of the program or otherwise separated from the K-12 cohort. So we're just paying less in this particular grant program. So the actual number of early grades math and science instructors and other math and science instructors in the middle and higher grades, I don't know that for certain, if that's changed a whole lot over the years. We do quite a bit in terms of emphasizing the significance of STEAM and STEM inside of schools. We have a STEAM certification program that's been going so well that we can't keep up with the backlog. We have just about 2/3 of the schools in the state have asked us for certification, and we have one person who's been handling most of that. And so there's a very valid interest in that. We're trying to meet that on our side. We do have an individual in our curriculum program specifically tasked with looking at the computer science field. That's the standards and curriculum development that person works on, and it's we haven't had that position in many years. We have a fine arts coordinator that does the same thing that we didn't have filled for many years. So the superintendent certainly believes that those are things and skill sets that students are going to need, and as a department we try to exercise our influence to the extent that we can to make sure that schools understand that that's a key area that they need to recruit from, but certainly understand the struggle that a lot of districts face in filling those positions.
Have there been like any surveys done to find out, because I'm really interested to find out why there were few teachers electing to participate? You don't have to give an answer now, but I'd definitely be interested in seeing, what was it about the program that few of them wanted to participate in, knowing that they were going to end up getting an increase in the salary for participating. So
yeah, it may be lack of awareness on their part and just not enough advertising of the program, frankly. But there was an audit done of it, a performance audit 2 years ago that had some, I thought, very helpful information. So we'll grab a copy of that for you to look at as well. Okay.
And next question is on 24.25, the technology career education. And I remember when we were doing the supplemental budget, the question came up about the apprenticeship program. And so I didn't see any recommendation in here about increasing the number of apprenticeship programs across the state.
No, ma'am, there is no recommendation. It's certainly a program that we're excited about. We've had folks involved in that come and present to the state board for the last 2 meetings, I believe, and haven't heard anything but good news stories out of that. So it is something that we as a department work on, but there isn't anything reflected in the budget that's specific to it.
Okay. Do you know why? Or I guess I need to ask the governor's office.
That'd be my recommendation.
Okay. That was it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Chairman Cantrell, anything? Ted, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Who else we got? Sam Ham for Fulton County School System. You here? Thank you. Great. Director of Transportation Services.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank this committee for allowing me to come and speak about school buses. I know the most exciting thing that happens in education as we begin our day with the school buses. What I wanted to talk about was school buses and specifically alternative fuel with school buses and some programs that we've enjoyed at Fulton County. And so if you indulge me, I'll share our personal story about all fuel and school buses.
Love to hear it.
Thank you. So for me, with Fulton County School, our logo basically tells a story. It's Fulton County Schools where students come first. So where students come first, which is why propane for us became an easy choice. And for me, this journey began in April of 2016. I attended a Council of Great City Schools conference in Charlotte. So I attended that first morning session, and the topic was about propane buses. And up until that time, I'd been nothing but, my world had been diesel school buses, didn't really know much about propane buses, and quite frankly, didn't have much of interest about hearing about propane buses. But after I sat through that presentation that morning, every director in that room, and they were directors from across the country, who had experienced propane as an alt fuel in the school buses, had nothing but positive things to say about school buses, propane school buses. To a person, not one negative comment, and that's very unusual when you're in a setting like that you don't have someone that has something negative to say about something, but that did not happen. So that evening when I was speaking with our chief operation, or my deputy superintendent of operations, I told him that I wanted to explore and learn a little bit more about propane school buses. Told him I wanted to visit the Bluebird plant down in Fort Valley, Georgia. And I thought that maybe propane is something that Fulton County Schools should be involved with. And much to his shock that I wanted to even look and do that, that's where we should go. So I visited the facility in Fort Valley and started learning a little bit about the propane buses and found out that Bluebird was probably is the premier manufacturer of a propane bus. Their engines are manufactured by the Ford Motor Company and then converted to propane by the Roush CleanTech system, which is the Ford engine plant is in Windsor, Canada, and right across the river back in Detroit is where the propane part of that engine becomes a piece of it. So I visited the Fort Valley facility, and then my friend, Mr. Studstill, who's from Paulding County, we went up to Canada and to Detroit and visited the plant there. Basically, the bus manufacturer, they've got a solid track record now with propane engines. That the engine's an OEM warranty backed by Ford. And they're manufactured by Bluebird, which again is a Georgia-based company. So we have the best budget at Fulton County Schools in my mind. We've got the best manufacturer. It's a bus manufacturer here in Georgia. And so we're off and ready to ready to go. But if you're going to get into propane as an alternative fuel, you've got to have a way or a means of fueling that bus. Most every school system in the state, we have a fueling station accessible to fuel our buses, and most all of them are diesel-based fueling stations. So we partnered with AmeriGas in our instance, to install 2 of the largest propane fueling stations in the country with no upfront cost to Fulton County Schools. That infrastructure cost basically is rolled into the price per gallon of the propane we use to fuel our buses. So we knew the type bus we wanted, and now we had basically a method to fuel that bus. For Fulton County Schools, there's one more additional piece that I wanted for our buses. You go back to November 2015, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administrator, Dr. Mark Rosekind, spoke to the National Association for the Pupil Transportation at a summit. And I will tell you, there were audible gasps in the room that day as he stated that seatbelts save lives and that NHTSA was recommending 3-point seatbelts for school buses. That's not a cheap proposition he was making, because they're at least $16,000 a bus to put 3-point seatbelts in a large bus. And then there's a capacity issue. The standard bus that we use at Fulton County and many of the other districts here in Georgia is what we call a 72-passenger capacity bus, okay? And that's based on elementary students, 3 to a seat each row, okay? By the addition of seatbelts, you would lose 6 or 2 rows of seats, 6 student capacity in that. So I went back to the Bluebird facility in Fort Valley, and this time I had to sign some legal documents that I keep my mouth shut on what I was about to see. Seems that Bluebird had been working on and had developed a new seat for the buses. Basically, they were great. And lots of thought and work went into these seats. This seat is superior to any seat that I have seen or been exposed to. That seat meets all the state and federal mandates for student safety with compartmentalization in place. But there's more. They have additional student safety enhancement feature of the 3-point seat belt, and this was accomplished without reducing the designated seat capacity of this bus. So last year on Monday, August the 7th, 2017, Fulton County Schools opened school with 90 new Bluebird buses, making Fulton County Schools the largest propane-powered school bus fleet in the state of Georgia and the first school system in the state of Georgia to offer propane buses equipped with 3-point seatbelts. Included in those 90 buses was the 10,000th propane bus manufactured by Bluebird. Those buses were made right here in the state of Georgia, serving a Georgia school system safely, transporting Georgia students, transporting Fulton County students. Basically, these buses are quiet. They allow our drivers to hear students we transport. The Ford Roush Clean Tech propane engines are certified by the EPA, and the California Air Resources Board is 90% cleaner than the EPA's current emission standards. We will reduce carbon dioxide and nitrogen oxide emissions by thousands of pounds each year compared with the diesel buses being replaced. Lower emissions means cleaner air for our students, cleaner air for our community. The latest test results show, and this is something I just became aware of, that 100 new Bluebird propane buses emit less nitrogen oxide than a single diesel bus manufactured before 2017. Maintenance costs are much lower on these buses. They don't need the multitude of additional parts found on today's diesel buses necessary to meet those emission standards. And again, as I mentioned earlier, these buses are 90% cleaner than current emission standards. And if I may, I'll share just a quick story about what I'm talking about on maintenance cost. On a typical diesel bus, when you just do a routine oil change, you might use up to 35 quarts of oil and up to a $65 drop-in type fuel filter. On the propane bus that we're currently running, 7 quarts of oil and a $5 spin-on filter, and you're good to go. So between lower fuel cost and lower maintenance cost, we project an annual savings of $3,000 per bus to operate this bus versus the diesel bus. As we are all in the budget season, I'm now looking at my maintenance cost this year at Fulton County versus the previous year. And those dollars are showing up. I can actually see it on the line item. I'm like, wow, my budget, I'm actually spending less dollars in parts and maintenance than I have in previous years. So when Fulton County voters approved the last 5-year SPLOST program, school buses were a part of the program. Over the 5-year period, we had planned to purchase 300 propane buses. We have aggressively pursued federal and state DERA grants and have taken advantage of any state DOE money that was earmarked for alternative fuel school buses. So last year when I heard about the $1.25 million to be awarded by the state DOE, I quickly offered my good friends that I would take advantage and be happy to take all that off their hands and ease their paperwork. But I've got to confess to you that the state did the right thing and allocated that fuel money, so that every district in the state of Georgia had the opportunity to take advantage of those funds. And kudos to those districts that stepped up and made that application. It's my understanding that all those funds were allocated during his budget time. When Fulton County Schools, when we opened school in August of 2019, we're going to crank approximately 768 or so buses. 67% of our fleet is this Type C 72-passenger school bus. I call it our large school bus. 50% of our large school bus fleet will be propane powered and 3-point seatbelt equipped. At the end of the 5-year period, 70% of Fulton County Schools' large bus fleet will be propane powered, equipped with seatbelts. In summary, our drivers will see an improvement in student behavior. They will operate quieter running buses. Student safety will definitely be enhanced. We will significantly reduce the amount of carbon dioxide and nitrogen oxide pumped into our community's atmosphere. And most importantly, during the next 5 years, Fulton County Schools, we should be able to return over $5.5 million back into our classroom in those costs alone. And I'll just share one last little tidbit. Here's your point of information for the day. If you want to know how to tell when you see a Bluebird bus on the road, how do you tell if it's a propane bus? Well, there's a little bird logo on the side of the bus above the service door. If that bird is green, it's propane. If it's black, it's a diesel bus. So there you have it. I'm welcome to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Tam. I appreciate you being there. I am certainly a fan of propane. I've used a lot of propane vehicles on my farm, and we certainly get good use out of those. And I have diesel as well, but the propane certainly does have a lot of advantages. And certainly like glad you know where Fort Valley is. It's part of my district, so. But they do. Bluebird is a great Georgia employer and has a great product. And glad you were able to take advantage of the 1.25 that this committee put in last year. Hope we'll have the opportunity to do it. I was talking to my counterpart over in the Senate, in fact, yesterday about propane buses, and I was talking about the value of them. And he asked a question, and I think it's a valid one. You talked about lower maintenance costs, but he mentioned he was concerned about higher operating costs. Propane doesn't have the BTUs in it as diesel does. Are you seeing any difference in the, and I know it's two different products, two different prices per gallon and that sort of thing, or have you, but cost per mile for fuel, have you done any calculation on that?
In very general terms, diesel for us, and we're on a contract with diesel. If last I checked, we were paying about $2.20 a gallon for diesel. Propane is less than that. Now, again, I said to do our infrastructure, we had a increased cost to do that. The diesel bus gets a little better gas mileage, miles per gallon, than the propane bus. But when you factor in the less cost of propane fuel versus diesel fuel, there's also a federal rebate of approximately 50 cents a gallon per propane fuel. You do come out a little better off in the end running that propane fuel.
Good. I hope you'll. I hope Senator Black get some information from you. I think he and I had a great conversation about it, and it's good. We got one other question, if you would.
Sure.
Representative Stovall.
Thank you for making the presentation. But what would be preventing some of the school districts from converting over, like Fulton County has done?
I think everything is learning. It's a knowledge scenario. Propane, the cost of that, the option for that engine is about, in Bluebird's case, is about $8,000 more. The state addressed that with their incentive, because if you purchased a Bluebird bus, they would give you an $8,000 rebate to offset that cost. So you're looking at apples to apples again. Now again, that was a limited amount of money that was available. So I know this committee and my good friends can maybe find some more that would help incentivize propane across the state. Our Georgia Association for Pupil Transportation, we are conducting through our various conferences and administrators workshops throughout the year. We are doing our part in making our fellow directors aware of the positives that we're experiencing with the propane bus. And last but not least, it may be not in middle to South Georgia, doesn't come into play. I know it's certainly come into play in Fulton and farther north you get. But the thing that really impressed me about propane is, as you well know about diesel, when it gets very cold, that diesel tends to start to gel up and it becomes very difficult to crank. Propane, and this is what, when I spoke to these other directors when I was in Charlotte, Denver, there was one in Minneapolis, someone in Pennsylvania, and they're talking about below zero type weather, and those buses fired right up without an issue or problem. I know at Fulton County, since we've had those buses, when we've gotten down below freezing, when we get to 16 degrees, we start cranking buses before the morning run just to make sure that we're ready to go. Propane's been a non-issue. They start right up.
Thank you, Ms. Dan. We've got some other folks that have signed up to talk, and thank you so much for your time coming.
Absolutely.
And certainly thank you for your enthusiasm on propane.
Thank you, sir.
Good. We have several people signed up to speak, and I'd love to have them. First is Mindy Benderman with Gears. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chairman.
And I'll turn that mic on, and you're.
Thank you so much. As the chairman said, I'm Mindy Benderman, the executive director of GEARS, the Georgia Early Education Alliance for Ready Students. I appreciated all the remarks today, but I especially appreciated Commissioner Jacobs from DECAL's remarks on her budget. We are pleased to partner with them, and we think they do a wonderful job in ensuring the safety and quality of child care and pre-K for our youngest students in Georgia. And today I'm here actually requesting a budget increase for one of the programs they run, the Children and Parent Services Program, or CAPS. As you know, high quality child care is essential to enable parents to get and keep a job, and also to give children a strong start in school and in life. And as a result, child care strengthens Georgia's economy and helps to ensure that our children have a strong foundation in early learning that can lead to grade level reading proficiency, high school graduation, and career success. Yet many low-income families in Georgia lack access to high-quality childcare that parents need to work and children need to thrive and grow. A recent report by my organization, GEARS, and the Metro Atlanta Chamber found that childcare challenges lead to at least $1.7 billion annually in economic losses to the state, and an additional $105 million in lost tax revenue. And this is as a result of absenteeism and employee turnover. Child care challenges are particularly profound for low-income families in Georgia because the high cost of child care puts it out of reach for many of these families. Low-income families in Georgia can spend 40% of their income in child care, and that creates a tremendous financial strain. And the CAPS program that I spoke about earlier can relieve some of that burden, but only about 11% of Georgia's eligible families are enrolled in the CAPS program due to budget limitations. And so what we hope is that you'll work with all of us in the private philanthropic community, which is also providing right now about $16 million in private funds to support quality in child care in Georgia. We hope that you'll help us leverage those investments with an appropriation of $5 million for the CAPS program. With that money, we can serve approximately 1,000 additional children annually, or we could increase rates, targeted rates for high-quality providers in low-income areas, or work on quality initiatives. That investment is incredibly important, and while we know that you have really difficult decisions to make and that budgets are tight, we can think of no better investment and no higher priority than investing in Georgia's current low-income workforce and our future workforce by investing in the CAPS program. So I thank you, and I'm always happy to answer questions or provide the data that you need to make the case.
Thank you, Mindy, for coming, and thank you for the program you put on the first week of session. It was very helpful to me, and you got a great group, great organization. Thank you for what you do. I hope you continue with that. And,
thank you for being there.
It really was. Any questions from anybody? Well, thank you, and we'll certainly continue to keep those thoughts in mind as we go forward. Next, Ed. You got to help me.
Close enough, sir.
Okay. National Math and Science Institute.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members for taking time to learn a little bit more about us and consider what we've had on the table in terms of a new pilot program. National Math and Science Initiative, NIMSI, as we call ourselves, is based in Dallas, and I will leave some information pieces behind. But we have been well vested with schools throughout the state, and we are in, or have been in, Richmond County Schools, Liberty County, Houston County, DeKalb, Columbia, Clayton, Bibb, and we are in Atlanta Public Schools as well. Ours is a STEM-based program focused on growing both the number of advanced placement courses being taught in schools and definitely to increase the access for children to those courses, especially for those children who are the furthest from opportunity. Excuse me. A large part of the programs that we've been able to deliver in Georgia have been associated with schools that support our military installations. The good news and part of the portfolio that I manage is that I get to show up with money because the Department of Defense funds the heavily impacted schools, i.e. at least 100 children of active duty military, and that allows us to put in place our college readiness program in those schools. 3-year implementation, and we've had some stellar performance out of those schools. We'll be adding on schools that support Fort Benning this next year as well, and know that we have more work to do throughout the state. And at the same time, in the Atlanta-based schools, we've been operating the program there based on a Federal Department of Education seed grant. And we're looking to grow around Atlanta, and I was happy to hear the story about Fulton County, and so we're excited about that. We have proposed a pilot program focused in Liberty County, and we know that Georgia has a strong regard and a penchant for its military installations, its military families. And because of programs that we've had in other places, we see that as a great start point. I also like to highlight that the 3 service secretaries last spring notified the governors associations that, you know, we need to ensure that we have rigorous quality education in the states where we have installations to ensure the continued growth of mission at those installations as well. And the program that we're looking at has 2 components on it, but primarily what's important about it is that we are focused on starting children on the journey towards STEM and advanced placement coursework in high school by connecting with them at K through 8. And it's just critically important, and ours has 2 components, one being a student-facing program for K through 5, computer-based, designed to ensure that children are at appropriate level as they move along. And then we have a teacher-facing program for the 6 through 8, which is a resource-heavy teacher training program. And I always refer to that as the supply side of both STEM and advanced placement coursework. And the intent is that we better prepare our children, better motivate our children to step straight into the more rigorous coursework as they move into the high school. So again, I'm available for any questions that you might have, but I want to thank you again for the opportunity to let you know that NMSI, National Math and Science Initiative, and Georgia have been great partners in schools throughout the state, and we continue to grow in that regard. Any questions?
Thank you, and you are correct. Georgia is very blessed to have military installations throughout our state, and those military personnel that get moved in and out every few years do expect their children to get a quality education, whatever part of the country they're stationed in, and so I thank you for your.
Thank you, sir. And I would add one other thing for the programs that have been funded by the Department of Defense. It's not a pull-out program for the military kids. Once we're able to launch program in that school, it's available to all the children in the school.
Yeah. Okay. Good
Thanks,
program. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience today and being here. Next on the list, Allison Evans with the Methodist Children's Home, Together, Georgia.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate your patience too.
Absolutely. Appreciate the opportunity. I'm with the Methodist Home. I'm the CEO and president of the Methodist Home down in Macon, Georgia, so from your neck of the woods. But I'm also here representing Together Georgia, which includes a coalition of organizations providing help and support for children either in the DFAC system or DJJ system. That would include Georgia Baptist Children's Homes, Twin Cedars, Devereaux, Kids Peace, Hillside, Youth Villages, so just a wide variety of providers. And we're here, those of us that have schools on our campuses, helping these children that have been through so much trouble. We're here to support the Non-Quality Basic Education Formula Grant Section 2414.7, where you provided funds to adjust the state-based salary to increase the salaries for our certified teachers and certified employees in the residential treatment facilities. That is just so important because if you raise the teacher salaries out in the general public, our teachers will leave us to go for those increased wages. And our teachers are so good and they're so committed to our children and they're making remarkable, remarkable success. So I just want to say thank you for acknowledging them and ask you to consider making sure you include that in any recommendations moving forward because we don't want to rob the children that we have in our care. I would share with you about the Methodist Home. We have priced education on our campus. It's a 3rd through 8th grade school. During our recent accreditation, we're Advanced Ed or SACS accredited. One of the reviewers said they were the social and emotional support of the needs for the children that we see at the Methodist Home is phenomenal. That they had never seen a school that had such a strong behavioral health program embedded within the school system, which leads to better learning opportunities for those kids. And even as the governor steps forward and puts more mental health professionals in our public schools, I think some of these private institutions are probably good role models to look at for how we have embedded those programs and put them together. Dr. Curtis Jones, who's our school superintendent, has been out to visit our campus on several occasions, and He put a quote in, he said, "This is great student engagement at Price Academy around coding, problem solving, and robotics." But he was particularly impressed about our children who were putting together a model chicken coop. And the irony caught me. Here we are taking these kids who have bounced around from home to home to home, and the project they want to take on is how to make life better for chickens who are laying eggs. And part of their solution was to actually build a solar-powered elevator that would lower the egg down so you didn't have to disrupt the chicken when you were harvesting the egg. And he said, he shared that with the entire district, saying all this to say that these kids are pretty creative, they're pretty ingenious, and they're doing pretty well on their milestones as well. So thank you for remembering our boys and girls as you look at these opportunities for teachers across our state.
Thank you for coming here, and you do have I've been on your campus several times, and y'all do a great job down there, and thank you for what you do. You do have one question from Representative All.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for coming today, especially coming up from Macon.
Yes, ma'am.
How is the funding provided for your organization?
For the organization as a whole, or for the school on our campus?
So it's two different things that are on your campus?
So, yes, ma'am. So we have the RBWO, Department of Children and Families. So our campus, the largest campus that we have, has 80 children. We serve 140 children in residential care in South Georgia. And these are children from all over the state of Georgia. Of course, we have our churches who support us and our private fundraisers and things like that. We receive RBWO per diems for the children who are the state children. And then in our school systems, we get the 618 grants, the non-QBE monies. That is so important because we also get some money from our school district. But it's those two together that enable us to have a small teacher to student ratios and bring some of those mental health services and parapro support right in. Right now on our campus, we have about 32 children in our school, in our 3rd through 8th grade, and they're at a 1-to-8 teacher ratio, plus a parapro in the room, plus the therapist available nearby, that when a kid has a trauma issue, and a lot of these kids have had significant traumas, and they can have flashbacks over the simplest things. I've actually heard of one, not a kid that we've served, but of one person who actually had a flashback trauma at a water fountain in the school every day because the water fountain reminded them of the blood that came out of somebody when they witnessed them being shot. So you think about this, you come in for recess every day, you stop at the water fountain, and all of a sudden that kid acts out. And you try to put it together as to why, and with the therapist there, they can reach in and find out why and what's going on. So we can create a different way for that kid to get a glass of water so he doesn't spin out and then not be in the classroom the rest of the day.
So does the school qualify for the state scholarship program that we have?
Do our kids qualify for
Yeah, what does the school itself? Because I know it's for private schools where they can apply for the state student scholarship. I think SSO, is that the?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Not to my knowledge. We have, like I said, the majority of our kids either come from DFACS or DJJ.
Okay.
If there's a privately placed student, that's where that benevolent care, that charitable dollar, just picks up the tab. The good people of the state of Georgia.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good questions, Dan. I think that's all.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Appreciate
sir.
your time. Absolutely. Next, Tanya Hollis with Teach for America.
Thank you, Chairman and members, for your continued support of Teach for America Metro Atlanta. As the Chairman stated, I'm Tanya Hollis. I'm the Managing Director of Development for Teach for America here in Metro Atlanta. As many know, Teach for America is a national organization that was founded in 1990. We have over 51 regions across the country, and Metro Atlanta was born in 2000. So over the almost 20 years we've been here in this great metro area, we have produced 3,200 core members who have served over 200,000 students pre-K through 12th grade. And we are incredibly proud of the work that we've done here. Many of our educators have gone on who have remained in the classroom. Some have moved beyond the classroom and moved into school administrative roles, district leadership roles. Some are leading in the city council here in Metro Atlanta and beyond. And we believe that our role in this work is to find promising leaders who we develop and support with the right mindsets and the skills through our partnership with organizations through certification. And we also develop them when they become alumni throughout their lifetime to be able to continue to serve the students that need them most. And that is a variety of ways. As I mentioned before, many are still teaching in the classroom, but others have found other passions We have alum who are starting organizations. We have alumni who are leading some of the top nonprofits in the city and in the metro area that are providing many needed services to students. We come here humbly thankful for the gifts that you have provided to support our program over the past several years. The support that you've provided to us allows us to support typically each year about 100 core members coming into our school system. Because we serve in the metro Atlanta area over the past 20 years, we've served several districts. We currently serve Fulton County, Atlanta Public Schools, and Clayton County, and we hope to continue to do so. Just one quick data point. Based on an audit done by the Georgia State Department of Audits, found that not only are districts benefiting by partnering with Teach for America, but also that our core members are having a positive impact on student achievement. We hope with your continued support that we will be able to continue to do that for many of the students in Metro Atlanta. Thank you again for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Anything? Okay, great organization. Thank you for what y'all do. Appreciate you coming for our committee. We also have two from the Georgia Association of School Nurses. Are y'all here? Lynn and Melanie? Thank y'all.
Hello, good afternoon, Chairman Dickey and other esteemed committee members. Thank you for allowing us to come and speak this afternoon very briefly with you regarding the plight of school nurses. As you heard earlier, there's been a proposal to decrease the funding for school nurses in the line budget item for the state. We are here humbly asking you to reconsider reducing those funds. As you know, school nurses, for most cases and for most kids around this state, we're the first line of defense in terms of health care that many of our children see. In fact, around the state and around the country, school nurses are considered the hidden treasure, or we call it the hidden treasure. Other people call it the hidden healthcare system in our country. And we're the hidden healthcare system in our country because many of our kids every day come to school with health issues and health needs that go undiagnosed or undetected. And the first place that they land is our school clinics. And the school nurses are the first to pick up on several of our chronic and acute illnesses and issues that our students have. So we're so thankful and grateful for the funding that has been given to us in previous years, but we cannot afford to see any reduction. Around the state today, we do not have a school nurse, a licensed nurse in all of our schools. In many of our districts, we share nurses. In Fulton County, I can speak to specifically, we have a nurse that serves 5 to 9 schools. We have what we call an unlicensed person, a clinic assistant in all of our schools, but that person is not a registered nurse. In our rural areas, it's very important where there is issues with access to care, et cetera. We understand that the formula that was used to come up with this reduction is based on student enrollment, but I share with you today that if a school loses, and I'm just going to use an example, a school has, an elementary school, 700 kids, and you lose 20. That means you lose your school nurse. You still have 780 kids to take care of. Those 20 that you lost, school nurses know, are probably the kids that were the healthiest kids and not the kids who need our services. And I start talking right into our presentation and failed to introduce ourselves, so my apologies. I'm Lynn Meadows. I'm the coordinator of student health services for Fulton County School System. I'm also the state director for the Georgia Association of School Nurses, which means on the national level for the state of Georgia, I represent all of the school nurses on the National Board of School Nurses. This is my colleague, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I am Melanie Bales. I am the president-elect of the Georgia Association of School Nurses. I will be installed in June. And I currently work as the supervisor for school health services in Cobb County School District. So thank you so much. I will piggyback on what my colleague has shared here. And just to remind you, we thank you so very much for the opportunity. We thank you over the years for the opportunity to make sure that school nursing is funded in the state of Georgia. And would just like to leave you with a few tidbits to remember that school nurses influence attendance, which influences achievement and graduation rates of our students here in the state of Georgia. In addition to that, teachers and staff consider nurse interventions vital to eliminating barriers to student learning and improving health overall. There is a significant relationship among socio-environmental factors, and those such as poverty, homelessness, and then of course those students who may realistically lack transportation. There is a significant relationship among those particular factors, education and health. And as previously mentioned in the more succinct discussion about the budget, it was mentioned that there is a shift to more complex, high-cost categories of our students here in the state of Georgia. Each year in this country, as well as in our state, we are seeing an increase in the survivors of preterm deliveries. Our neonatal ICU survival rates are rising. And as a result of that, those students who, or children with moderate to severe disabilities and learning behaviors, they are entering school at increased rates. Those children are medically fragile. They require interventions from our nursing staff. They may be on ventilators. They may require tube feedings. They quite honestly require complex interventions in order to access their education on a daily basis. Therefore, as a result of that, there is a need to increase school health services within our state.
So with that, we will certainly entertain any questions, but we do want to leave you with this thought, is that we know that healthy children learn better. Ms. Bales mentioned about how we improve attendance, seat time, again, the correlation between health services and academic success, as well as communities thrive when kids are healthy. And so with that, again, we just implore you to restore the funding. We were so happy to hear that Governor Kemp is proposing to increase the number of school counselors. Those are our partners, some of our partners in the school district, but we would love the governor to also champion the fact to take up more school nurses are also needed in schools. Oftentimes, children who suffer with issues, mental health issues, behavioral health issues, if there is some crisis issue, the first place that most children land are in the clinic first, where the school nurse determines or acknowledges there's something going on. We see the breadcrumbs that kids are leaving, and then we refer them to our colleagues, like our school counselors, et cetera. So school nurses' roles in schools are so important, and again, we just appreciate your support. We're happy to entertain any questions that you might have. We also have a couple of packages for you, folders that we want to leave with you with some additional information about school nurses and how we look in the state and across the country.
Well, thank you definitely for the work that you all do in the schools. I know it's not easy, especially having to deal with the emotional part and then the physical part that comes with our students across the state. The question I do have is, when there's not a school nurse present, and I know we have a large number of children with health issues like with asthma and some of the other things as far as medicine that's required, who helps to administer or monitor the students to making sure that they're taking the correct dosage and all that? And the second part of that question is, when you have the young ladies that might have female issues, how are those handled when there are not school nurses present at the school?
So that's an excellent question, and thank you for asking that question. So unfortunately, Georgia is one of the states that does not have mandates for school nurses or the number of school nurses, or even a mandate to say that there must be a licensed school nurse in every school. So with that being said, every school district you're subject to just staff your clinics or create your own school health services program, unfortunately. So in some schools, if there's not a school nurse there, it could very well be the front office secretary, it could be one of the parapros, it could be a coach. It really is determined by that particular school system. Several years ago, which is what brought me to Fulton County, this is my 19th year in this position, is when Governor Barnes was the governor, and he earmarked $30 million from the tobacco settlement money to be put in the budget to make sure that there was at least one licensed school nurse in every school district, So that's how I came to Fulton County. Since that time, I've been trying to, and we have collectively across the state, build up our school nursing staffing. But every year it's a struggle to keep what we got because the funding keeps getting reduced, or the proposed funding is reduced. So it really varies. But to your question, as it relates to females, again, it depends on who the school has assigned, or the district assigns to be that responsible person. So many parents, I will say this, believe that there is a school nurse in every school.
Yeah.
And when they have an issue with a student and they find out there is not a school nurse there, that's a challenge as well. And it's a shame that we have to say in many of our schools, I'm sorry, we don't have a school nurse. And let me just mention this about the population. For the state of Georgia, a third of our children have some type of diagnosed medical condition. So if you count off in a classroom and you count off 1, 2, 3, this student has diabetes. 1, 2, 3, this student has asthma. 1, 2, 3, this student has a cardiovascular disease, and it goes on. So it's a third of our children, and I can say that honestly in Fulton County. We have 98,000, roughly between 96 to 98,000 kids. 34,000 of them have documented medical conditions.
Wow.
That's a third of our students.
I have another question, Mr. Chairman. I know we're kind of cutting on time. When it comes down, I know as a state overall, there's a shortage of nurses, even for our hospitals. And so what is your recommendation when you look at trying to recruit nurses to come into the school system versus them going or remaining, with the hospitals? And I know we've got quite a few colleges that have nursing programs and all of that. So that was one of the other questions I had. And then also with the school-based health clinics, how can that be able to help assist in that shortage of nurses, being that those clinics are actually based at the school campus?
So as it relates to the piece about recruitment, you're right, and being a nurse for as long as I have, and I used to be the assistant vice president of nursing at Grady, so I used to deal with staffing every day. So the staffing is still tough for RNs. I think for the school district, though, one great point about being a school nurse is, especially for moms that have families, it's just being on the school calendar. So many of us take decreases in salaries just to work in that environment because it's so conducive to families. So for school nursing, I will say, and we haven't had that problem yet to recruit for school nurses yet. When I have a vacancy, I know it gets filled. I mean, I have nurse practitioners coming trying to be school nurses just because of the hours. Certainly not because of the pay, but for the hours.
And I would have to agree with that. We experience, although every once in a while our turnover is a little bit high in my district, we are typically able to fill that position quickly. The challenge comes about, though, because of the nurse pay within our districts and the fact that it varies from district to district.
Yeah, and as it relates to the school-based health centers, we love school-based health centers because that's truly providers right on campus for kids who need to be seen by a provider. Unfortunately, that doesn't take the place of the school nurse who's there, because the school nurse that's there, to your point, is the one every day managing the students, whether they require medications or responding to emergency. The school-based health centers, though, are wonderful because if I come into the nurse's office in the clinic and I'm running a temp, and the school nurses say, okay, I need to call your parent, you need to go home, something may be going on. Well, instead of those kids going home, if they have a consent, they simply go down the hall to the school-based health center. And that also reduces the amount of time that students are away, and can come back, you can get your medication right there, be out of school less than 24 hours, and return to school.
Thank y'all, I appreciate it, and great job y'all do, and great question. It was, I was gonna ask the same thing too, so very good, getting some good answers here. So thank you for coming. We are getting close out of time. There's everybody on the list, but I think, is anybody else would like to address our committee? I'd be happy to try to do that. If not, if it's up to you, Representative, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved. So well. Thank y'all very much. I know it was a long day for a lot of y'all being here, and so meeting adjourned. A lot of good information.